Welcome to Jared Scott Outdoors, your source in the field for local outdoor news. We didn't want to give up yet, but we had to see if we could find more deer, more areas to hunt. We tried a few other spots with no luck and then decided it was time to hit a completely different area, and in this case, a totally different unit. This hunt actually spanned 2 different units, and until now, I'd only tried the unit I was familiar with. That's where we were when we spotted a handful of deer that were right next to some private land, but still on BLM. Our quick try at them just saw them go into the private land, and so we continued on searching. All right, so it's another day out. It's a beautiful day, and we've actually been going around quite a bit. We've seen some deer, as you saw. We've seen some elk that we couldn't get to because of private land, just not being able to get to the mountains. But we finally did find a herd of elk up above this knob up here. It's going to be a good hike. We're not quite sure where they are because they were feeding and moving, but we've got a game plan, which is basically coming up, circling around the back and getting above them because the wind should be coming up, and then we're going to sneak in and see if we can find them. So we've got deer tags, and then Kim also has a cow muzzleloader tag. So we've got some elk. We may as well go after them. So yes, this hunt started as a deer hunt, but as the deer hunting was not going as planned and we'd been seeing so many elk instead, Kim decided that he may as well grab an over-the-counter muzzleloader cow elk tag. If the deer sightings were slim, we could just head out after elk. And that's exactly what this day turned out to be. We could find very few deer while we were seeing several herds of elk. So off we went after the elk. There was no easy way to get to these without climbing some serious elevation and quickly. Everything here was steep in all directions. What could we do but go after them? So that's what we did. The plan was to head up this draw just following the best route we could find. Staying in this draw would keep us out of sight and hopefully keep our scent from going up to the elk. To get an idea of where the elk were, they were up near the tree line but over the ridge to our left as we were looking up. So if we could get up there, staying in the draw to keep our scent away from them, we could go ahead and hike up above them into the trees to keep our cover while we located them again. You see, they were on the move when we got started, and so now that we were out of sight, we really weren't sure of the exact direction they took. There were about 3 places they could have gone, so once we could get above where we thought the elk would be, we'd have to very carefully try to locate them. This was one of those hikes where Kim and I thought it wouldn't take too long because we could see the end goal. But in reality, the steepness of the mountain wore us down and wore us down quick. The closer we got, the steeper it got. And even though the ridge we were aiming for didn't look too far off, we had to take tons of rest breaks to get our legs back under us. At least with all this hiking, we had a beautiful view to stare at each time we took a break.
Well, we've just about made it to the top of this ridge. It was probably 1,600 feet elevation gain, so it took a while. And we should be way above the elk. We're trying to get the wind in our favor, just playing it smart, so we will see what happens. We'll take a break, switch out our clothes. We had to take off a few layers, so we'll get our white stuff back on and our heavier stuff, and then get the gun ready and sneak over.
We headed up a few hundred more yards and then decided we were close enough. It was time to get the gun out to have the muzzleloader ready just in case the elk surprised us and were just over the ridge. We hoped they weren't right above us, but there was still a good chance that they were there. Kim got his cap on, which meant all he had to do was pull the hammer back to be ready for a shot, and we kept going. Working slowly over the top, we took it easy, watching very carefully as we went. The last thing we wanted to do was hike all the way up here, only to bust the elk at the end of the hike. Anyhow, we were careful, but there didn't appear to be any elk up here. Either they'd already gone above us, they were still below us, or they were over the ridge and down into the trees a little. So we still had to take it easy. We did have one thing going for us, and that was the snow, at least as far as finding out where they went. We'd know they were above us if we found fresh tracks heading that way. So far, there were only a few elk tracks, definitely not enough to account for all the elk we'd seen. So knowing they weren't above us, they were either in the trees or still below us. And just like before, we could check the trees for tracks, or elk for that matter. Slowly slipping in and keeping an eye out down below for bedded up elk, we didn't find them or their tracks. So now we could be fairly confident they were down below us. Probably about in the last place we'd seen them, because that was the only area we really couldn't see into. They could still be down further in the trees, but my guess is they were bedded up on that open hillside. Slowly working downhill, we did finally spot an elk stand up. It was about 300 yards below us with no cover to hide us, so we quickly backed up into the trees for cover. We kept in the trees as we dropped down lower. We had spotted a point down below us that we wanted to get to before coming out into the open. We had kind of a dead tree as our landmark. We figured it would put us in range of the elk as soon as we saw them. The trick would be us seeing them and getting into a shooting position without getting caught first. Getting to the point we previously picked, we very slowly worked out and into the open. The round of the hillside hid us from the elk, but it also hid the elk from us. Suddenly, I could see a couple elk. They were up and staring hard towards something in the trees below us.
I don't know if they're looking at us or not. I hope not. They're all right there.
As we were sneaking in, we had heard a weird sound that I couldn't tell what it was. Whatever it was, it also had the elk's attention. With the herd all at attention now, staring into the trees, several of them turned and started walking away and out of sight. As soon as I couldn't see them anymore, I had Kim hurry towards me. If he was going to get a shot, we had to make it happen before they all left. Just as happens so often when you're trying to hurry too fast, I looked up and suddenly saw a couple elk looking right at me.
One's looking at us. One's looking, if you can see, shoot. Right there, to the left.
All I could see were their heads, but I was pegged. They were going to spook, and I had to get Kim on them.
They're looking at me.
As other elk came into view, we were fortunate to have the main group of elk coming back the other way, meaning they would actually cut right underneath us if they kept in that direction. Sure enough, they started filing by us, about 150 yards down. By my line of sight, they were actually dropping right below the rise of the hillside, and most of their bodies were kept out of my view. I could see head and necks pretty easily, but not the kill zone.
They're getting ready to spook. Get the tripod up high. They're going to come across the right.
Luckily, Kim had my tripod that extended for a standing shot. He was able to set it up and keep his line of sight up high, and lucky for us, Kim's location actually gave him a better angle than I had. He could see much more of the elk than I could. But the problem was, there were so many elk that they were too close for a clean shot. Suddenly, one cow separated itself just a little and walked out onto a little rise that really set it apart from the rest. Kim didn't waste the opportunity and settled in for the shot. My first impression was that I thought I saw that cow flinch, so I figured he'd made a hit, but the elk were out of sight so quickly that I really couldn't be sure. The elk actually all came back into view a bit lower as they headed towards the trees, but we watched as whatever they had heard in the trees earlier still kept them from wanting to go that way. They could see us above them, and they didn't like the trees, and so they turned around again and headed back to the left, and finally out of sight for good.
Now these ones are coming
Meanwhile, Kim was loading his muzzleloader again so he could be ready when we dropped down to see if his shot was true.
back. All right, you got to like that. That's awesome. Other than we don't know if it's a hit. For sure, I think it is. We'll find out in a minute. They went right over the round of the hill on the shot. I thought I saw something with that cow that was standing out. Of course, I wasn't for sure which one he was shooting at, but we'll go check it out once he's loaded again.
Ramming his ball and powder to the end of the barrel and putting another cap on, we could now move forward and find out what happened. Heading on down to the last spot we thought the elk were when he took his shot, we started looking for blood. At this point, we were probably both getting a little nervous because we could neither see any elk laying down dead in sight or any blood for that matter. However, it was actually pretty tough to find the exact spot the elk was standing when he shot, because there were tracks all over from both before and after the shot.
So I think it was somewhere in this area.
As we were trying to find the spot the elk must have been, I suddenly saw down below us another 100 yards, tucked in a slight depression, an elk. He had got his elk, and she was down.
Oh, there's an elk down there at the bottom. Down on the bottom. I think it's it. There's an elk down there. You got her. Clear the bottom. Right where it flattens out. Just out of sight. Which is what we wanted. Downhill. Yeah, if you scoot up just a little, you'll see it right in the very bottom.
Well, this is awesome.
Gotta like that.
Once Kim spotted the cow, we excitedly headed on down to her. That's when we came across the blood trail. Wherever he had hit her must have been a solid shot. That was beyond the point now, but good to know nonetheless.
So, it looks like Kim is a deadeye. We came down here where it was standing. You could probably see on video that one that stood up out of the rest. Sure enough, that's the one he aimed for, the one I assumed he would aim for. We came down to that point and have yet to see any blood, but looking down at the bottom of the saddle, there's an elk laying there. So, looks like you nailed it.
I guess we'll see.
We'll head down there, make sure it's not a mirage, but we should be good. I forgot I was going to tell you to shoot one of the small ones. Not the big cow that stood up.
You'll see Kim had his phone out as we approached the elk, and that's because he was able to use an app to live stream his excitement with his family. It had been 20 years since he'd been out in the field and wanted to share this moment with those closest to him. Pretty amazing what we can do nowadays.
But yeah, I think that's the biggest cow in the herd.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, you'll be sorry in about 2 hours. You'll be sorry.
I'm sure. They're glutton for punishment.
Suddenly, Kim pointed up the slope, and there above us, the elk had come back, and they were all looking at us again. We knew it was the same herd because there was that same single 5-point bull.
All that sneaking we were doing, and then they just run right across after we've been chatting.
It was actually a pretty sight to end today's hunt with, because it was now no longer a hunt. Now it was time to change from hunters to meat packers.
Well, here you can see Kim's cow that he got.
Yeah.
It worked out perfectly. We saw him, we made a game plan, we did a little extra work to try to make it happen so that we didn't get winded.
Yep.
And then this guy here put a good shot down.
Yeah.
So 20 years? How long has it been since you hunted?
Yeah, it's 20 years. 1999 was the last time I went out.
All right,
So,
20 years.
20 years, and hey, this is great. Cow tag, obviously no horns, so yep, we're legal. Awesome.
Kim's a high jump coach, and we got chatting at track one day, and we talk all the time, and he's like, hey, it's been a while since I've been hunting.
Yeah.
You got any ideas? And I was like, well, let's go hunting.
Yeah.
So
Yep.
we came out, and 20 years later.
And it's successful.
Yep.
Yeah, this is going to be a good elk steaks, roasts, jerky, all that stuff.
There's a lot of meat on this animal. So
Yeah.
way to go, congratulations.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate that.
Awesome shooting there.
Yeah.
So
Wow.
now we got to try to pack this cow off
Yeah.
and see if we can get off in the daylight. I don't know, we might be pushing it.
You ever seen the guys on the sleighs? Maybe we could just point her down. It's steep enough that we could do that.
We might get a few hundred more feet out of her sliding that way. So anyways, that's going to wrap it up.
Yeah.
Tune in next week at the same time for another episode of Jared Scott Outdoors.